said I was going to make a series, and I filmed a second episode. Okay, so this is the second video in a series that I'm calling How I Find Beauty in the Ordinary, and So Can You. I talked a lot more about this in the first video, but the general idea is that I have a very interesting and often unique way of seeing in the world, where all of these incredible patterns and textures and colors and these tiny little scenes play out in front of me, and it just kind of jumps into my eyes in a way that I think makes for really kind of amazing filmmaking. And so I decided that though this is a way of seeing the world that isn't particularly common, it's something that I don't think is necessarily unique to me and my mind. And so I wanted to make this series to help kind of train your eyes to expand the experience of how you wander in nature and how you see the world around you. And I think it has the amazing potential to unlock some incredible moments of beauty that otherwise you may not have seen in what seem to be very ordinary scenes, but in fact have extremely astonishing beauty. So this episode I'm going to be making is on contrasts in nature. And again, like the episode on lines in nature, this is something that in the art world is very often used to force the eye in one direction or another, and painters and photographers have used it for quite some time. And by contrast here, I'm not just talking about the classic color wheel where it shows, you know, the various complementary colors and memorizing those kinds of things. And while that's involved, there's really a much deeper depth of contrasts that I really want to explore, where there are not only differences in color, there are differences in texture and direction and light and dark. And so basically the fundamental idea is finding scenes where one thing is different from another and yet they're juxtaposed next to each other. And before I go into too much more detail, let's go run a sequence. And back. So as you can see from that sequence, there was all sorts of really interesting patterns of adjacent colors or areas of light and dark that are right next to each other that stand out. And ultimately, that's really what you're looking for, are things that may contrast with each other in one way or another. Things that are more light than another thing, that are brighter. Things that are more jagged next to something more smooth. Things that are one color next to another. And when these particular elements are next to each other in this scene, they'll often kind of play off of each other. You'll look at one and then shift to the other and then shift to the other and then shift to the other. And it really creates a lot of room for the eye to explore and find some really beautiful elements. I especially love, you know, contrasts in color, and I think they're often the most common. And I would almost completely forget about the color wheel. You can have colors that are very similar. You can have a group of leaves that are a certain shade of green and just one single leaf that has a different shade of green. And all of a sudden it'll stand out in this very beautiful way of just seeing this kind of unique character in the scene that your mind is painting. And so too, you can have contrasts of texture where you can have these very sharp, well-defined, jagged edges of like a rock or something like that, and then a very smooth, beautiful vine just kind of working its way down, and that contrast of jaggedness and smoothness can create that same kind of visual pleasure as well. And so something that I emphasized in the first video that I want to emphasize again here, these kinds of techniques of looking for these sorts of visual differences and compiling them together should be done in such a way that you reduce the predefined importance of some set of objects, saying this particular object, like a rock or a log, is more important than this fern or this blade of grass. Once you start to approach the scene with an open mind, where you don't try to catalog or sort objects by some kind of hierarchical scale, but instead just look at them in a objective way. You look at them without this notion of importance, and all of a sudden you'll find that often the collection of items in a scene, even if it's something that we wouldn't think about all that much, these individual blades of grass, this little bit of spider cobweb, this fly perching on the surface of a leaf, all that in itself, when approached with an open mind and open heart, is something that you will suddenly see has astonishing pattern and beauty to it. And I think this is probably one of the most important points I can make in this series, is try to remove yourself from this idea that you need a important focal object, that this thing is more important than the other. You know, it's almost like the opposite of a lot of landscape photography, where you have very explicitly defined features of the landscape that you make people look at. You have the focal mountains or the focal lake or the focal human standing there. So this is almost disassociating yourself from the meaning of what's in the scene, and instead open-heartedly examining the scene and just seeing what it offers for its own sake, what the colors are, what the lights and darks are, what the textures are, and then just use your eye to follow and examine the scene. And then all of a sudden, you'll see these little elements in your life, whether it's a room that you're doing office work or whether you're out in nature exploring a waterfall. You'll find all of these small little scenes that you never would have looked at otherwise when you kind of approach the scene from this kind of open-minded perspective. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope it does kind of bring you a new perspective and just adds a little bit more of a toolkit to help you see the beauty and wonder in everyday ordinary scenes and help really enrich and amplify the experiences of your daily life. So I think it has a great deal of potential to do just that. If you're not yet subscribed, please do so. And until next time, everyone, wander and wonder.